Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bad Luck Gamer, and today we're going to be talking about the Centaurs, another amazing ancestry that came from Howl the Wild, and honestly, the one that feels like the most fleshed out. If I'm not mistaken, it actually is the one that has the most pages dedicated to just talking about the ancestry in general. So there's definitely going to be a lot to cover, and sorry the video's taking so long to come out. Some of you may know I'm going to be a dad soon, so that's been a lot of stuff. So hopefully videos will return more to a regular rhythm starting now. But, things have just been a little crazy lately. But let's go ahead and get started with these centaurs. So the centaurs are very interesting, and I will say, honestly, very well written. Overall, the centaur has been kind of designed as a replication of, the Greek mythologies around centaurs, specifically Chiron and, the whole archery, herbalism, being a good teacher kind of stuff. But their stories are actually, or their society is actually very interesting and very well written. The centaurs are predominantly a nomadic kind of, not keeper, but they try to protect their surrounding territories, kind of similar to how Native Americans would have, where they are all about, preserving the natural elements, not overhunting, not overlogging, not doing all this other kinds of stuff. Because as a centaur would, they are predominantly nomadic. They can't really sit still for extended periods of time. They're not really suited for sedentary lifestyles, which makes complete sense. So they go around, they ensure that every area that they live in is well maintained, and that's kind of how their culture is formed around. Now, they're also very competitive, very not militaristic, but they are very athletically built and determined to really make the use of that. So they spend a lot of their times either doing farming or other kinds of herbalism, gardening, and then they are also predominantly warriors. So very interesting. I love the lore. I definitely recommend looking into it. They're very well written out, and honestly, compared to many of the other ancestries, there's a lot to go on here. It's sad because they share kind of some of the same territories as Minotaur, and there's some stuff with the Minotaur that kind of clashes with how the Minotaur was written for this book, but they are way more fleshed out than the Minotaurs were, and they feel like much more of a people, not overly virtuous. I mean, obviously they're painted in a good light for the majority of how it's written here, but they do have some qualities that can rub people the wrong way, and of course they also talk about some of their territorial disputes with some of the major nations in the setting, which honestly makes a lot of sense. So that being the case, I really do like how the centaurs were written. But what about their stats? What are we looking for when we're choosing to play as a centaur? Well, centaurs are a uncommon ancestry, which isn't too bad, honestly. They have 8 hit points, and they are a base size large. So for all you large loving players out there who want to play a large ancestry, we got another great one here. Their base speed is also insanely fast with a speed of 30. They also get an ancestry that increases their speed, which we'll get to here in a little bit. And their attribute boosts are strength, wisdom, and a free one with a flaw of charisma. The charisma does make a good amount of sense. They predominantly don't get along with other ancestries unless they absolutely have to. And because they're nomadic, they don't really get to make friends for extended periods of time. So unless that's with another centaur, they typically don't have a lot of practice really socializing with other people, which again makes a lot of sense. And so does the strength and wisdom. Dex would be a good one as well, but this one obviously makes the most sense. As far as what abilities they have, so they are, interestingly, trait-wise, they are a beast, centaur, and humanoid, which does actually make a lot of sense. If you weren't aware, there is a difference between animals and beasts tend to be more on the supernatural side, more of chimeras and the like, and centaurs are kind of fit in that territory. Humanoid is a little bit more interesting. I wouldn't even say they were humanoid-esque, but here it is. And actually, an interesting factoid about the centaurs as well. Centaurs find horses to be somewhat unsettling. I mean, it does make a lot of sense when you think about it. It's like, oh, there's no body on top of that torso. It's just a neck and a head. That's so weird. It's interesting to think of that kind of perspective. To centaurs, the way they are is normal, is the natural. So when they see a horse that looks mostly like them, except for like the lack of an upper torso, that would be really weird, wouldn't it? So I do find that to be very fun lore with the centaurs. They also have dark vision, which actually doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. Dim light, I would have understood if you had an aspect of like night hunting or something, but dark vision really doesn't make a lot of sense here. They're not known for inhabiting caves or any other kinds of cramped spaces. In fact, that's very counterintuitive to how they want to live. So dark vision itself, maybe it ties into the myths. I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, it's probably because as far as their overall kit loadout is concerned, they didn't have enough to compare to some of the other ancestries. So they kind of just threw dark vision in here, which does feel a little off. They also have another unique ability, mount, which allows them to act as a mount for a PC that is at least one size smaller than them rather than the standard two. Now, they overemphasize over and over and over again, centaurs do not want to be ridden. It's something they heavily dislike, and they only allow it for their closest of allies. Whether players respect that or not, probably not in more situations or not, but they did heavily emphasize in the lore they really don't want to be a mount. So this power here is kind of silly, but at the same time makes a lot of sense. They also have a really good feature as well with robust. This allows them to increase their encumber limits by 2, which is pretty cool. It makes a lot of sense. They're large, obviously, and large creatures already have an increased carrying capacity in comparison to medium creatures. But with this, the bulk limit increase allows them to carry a lot more. And obviously, this makes it easier for them to act as a mount, because if the person who's riding them is like fully kitted out, I mean, a medium humanoid is a bulk 6 plus whatever gear they're currently wearing, which probably puts them closer to bulk like 8 to 10. But the increased bulk capacity does make a lot of sense. So yeah, very, very interesting core stats. But let's go ahead and take a look at the heritages that you can look forward to using. So first we have the Budding Speaker Centaur. Now this is actually a very big heritage, though you don't absolutely need it for everything. So the Centaurs, as far as their magic casters are concerned, they're usually typically split into 2 core groups, either Green Speakers or Faith Speakers. Green Speakers follow actually the Green Faith, which is something that's very interesting lore-wise. It's not very often brung up, but the Green Faith is actually very important to the Galarian lore. And this gives them access to primal abilities and such. And for this particular heritage, when you select either Green Speaker or a Faith Speaker, you have to choose either primal or divine, and then you can't change this later. This also gives you a cantrip from the given spell list as well. So the Green Speakers are primal, you get a primal cantrip, and then the Faith Speakers, which are the religious type that actually pray to gods, which I guess I didn't really mention the faith part earlier, so let's go ahead and talk about that, because that makes a lot of sense here. So the popular edicts of them is they ensure knowledge is passed on. This plays into their often mentorship type of roles they like to play, and to live in harmony with the natural world, play fair in an honest competition, and their anathema are fail to roam, aid in the wanton destruction of natural landscape. Fail to roam is very interesting here, because that doesn't really seem much as like a belief thing, and more of just like, again, they're half-horse people. Sitting still for extended periods of time does not feel good for them. So it's strange that it's here as an anathema, but regardless, it's here. And so if you're a faith speaker, you kind of tie into the various gods that, whatever their particular individual culture might, adhere to. And as well, you would be concerned with some of these if you possibly play either a champion or a cleric, so something to keep in mind. And as well, being a face speaker, you get a divine cantrip, and further along, you'll get divine spells. So overall, I really like the speakers. I find that to be a very interesting part of their lore, and there's actually a lot of feats that tie into this one specifically. So if you're not going versatile heritage, I would definitely consider going down the speaker route for your heritage. Next up, we have the Fleetwind Centaur. This one's just insanely good because it's a heritage that increases your speed. So your speed is now 5 feet faster, making it 35. Being one of the fastest ancestries at base, not taking any feats into consideration. Now, technically, an elf can also get 35 at level 1, and there's no centaur feat that lets you do so or gain an additional 5 feet. So they technically tie, but with the Fleetwind Centaur, you don't need to spend an ancestry feat to get that extra speed. So really good, and I'm sure a very popular choice for many who wish to get the most bang for their buck when playing a centaur. Next up, we have the Ironhoof Centaur. Now, this one was actually changed in the errata, which I'll also put up here. Now, they gain an unarmed hoof attack that deals a d6 bludgeoning damage. Now, here it says it is in the brawling group and it has the agile and unarmed traits, but actually it was changed to finesse in the errata. And that's because there's another feat later that improves the damage from this particular heritage, which would make a D8 agile weapon, which is very, very strong. So Paizo decided to change it, changing it to a D6 finesse weapon instead. Kind of sad, honestly, and because of that, it doesn't play as well into the Centaur because Centaur don't get an innate buff to Dex. You have to kind of build yourself that way. But I understand the balancing mechanic. Obviously, a D8 agile weapon is really strong. So they had to kind of temper that a little bit. So it's actually finesse, not agile. Next up, we have the Model Coat Centaurs. Now, the Model Coat Centaurs are actually very interesting also in the lore because Centaurs used to tell like prophecy using the coat patterns of individual Centaur when they're born. Now, since prophecy was, stopped after the Age of Lost Omens, which we no longer, prophecies no longer work the way they used to. It's still part of their culture, but mostly forgotten. If you have a particularly interesting pattern when you're born, it's still seen as an ill or good omen, depending. But for the most part, you don't get your fortune read anymore just based on your coat pattern. And this one really plays into the model coat specifically because you either have modeling or stripes that help you hide in certain types of terrain. So when you select this particular heritage, you select a terrain, either Arctic, desert, forest, mountain, plains, or swamp. A lot of good choices. And in your selected terrain, you get a +1 circumstance bonus to stealth checks to hide or sneak, and 2 deception checks to feint. The feint part is actually really cool. So it's not just hiding, it's also 2 deception checks for feinting purposes, which is really cool. Also, another weird large ancestry that's really good at hiding, which is an interesting trend in this particular book. Next up, we have the size variant, Ponygates. The Ponygate Centaurs are a medium size rather than large, and you get a +1 circumstance bonus to reflex saving throws. Now, even though they still technically have the mount feature as their ancestry does, that just means that now you can just only have small creatures ride you rather than medium creatures. And there's really no other change. You're just easier to maneuver, which could be a good thing. And the bonus to reflex saving throws, like if you don't care about being large, it's honestly pretty good. A bonus to reflex saving throws, just in general, like a flat save bonus just for this is actually an incredibly powerful boon for the system. So really good, especially if you're going as a dex-based centaur, which they really have good reason to because they do have at least a feat dedicated to archery. So, that being the case, Ponygate Centaur is actually pretty good. Our final heritage here is the Stoutheart Centaur. And Stoutheart is just one of those, the Stoutheart is just something I feel like it's used a lot, or some variation of stout or heart for hardy. They could have just been hardy centaur. I don't know. It just feels like they're reusing the same type. Anyway, what this does is it gives you a base of 10 hit points for your ancestry rather than 8, which is good. 2 extra HP is never a bad thing. And you get a +1 circumstance bonus to acrobatics checks to balance and to your reflex DC to avoid being tripped. So very interesting. The acrobatics check to balance is kind of meh, but the reflex DC to avoid being tripped is actually not too bad at all, and a good feature to have, because there are a fair number of creatures that can potentially trip you. So that being the case, this is pretty good, and you just get 2 extra HP, which is never a bad thing. Moving on to the feats, ancestry feats specifically for the Centaur, we start off with Centaur lore. Centaur lore is okay. I mean, it makes you trained in both medicine and nature, which is a little silly because you're going to see in some feats here later on that they replace a lot of medicine checks with just nature. But regardless, you become trained in both medicine and nature, and of course, Centaur lore. Centaur lore is okay. They do occupy a fair number of regions, and they seem to be one of the more widespread of the ancestries, culturally speaking, that come out in this book. So it's not bad, not one of the worst ones to say the least. But, you know, the medicine and nature part is only super relevant if you want to go down the medicine route, which there are some feats that kind of lead into it. So it's a pretty okay feat. Centaur weapon familiarity is similarly okay. This is best if you are playing some kind of class that doesn't get martial weapon proficiency, because it can give you access to a lot of good long range weapons like the longbow or short bow, even the spear to some degree. But honestly, like many of the weapon familiarity feats nowadays, because you don't get access to any unique weapons that are unique to that ancestry, there's not a reason to take this if you're going a martial class. The weapons you gain access to is the lance, longbow, long spear, short bow, and spear. And for proficiency purposes, any of these that are martial weapons are treated as simple weapons. So yeah, you also get the critical specialization at 5th level. So that's, I guess, the one good part is not every class actually gets weapon specialization for the weapons they get to use. So getting weapon specialization is probably the main reason why you'd want to take this. But so many of these weapons are kind of some of the most basic of basic that I don't know. Maybe there's some really good combinations. And like I said, if you're playing a particular class that doesn't get proficiency very easily, then this is a good way to get access to something like the longbow, for instance. So yeah, overall, I'll say this one is good. The crit specialization plus getting access to weapons you might not normally have, I think are very good quality of life for some builds of characters anyway. Next up, we have Practiced Brawn. Now, this is a very interesting one and kind of ties into a lot of this Centaur is about. It gives you a +1 circumstance bonus to athletics checks to force open and shove. Now, you also gain a bonus to fortitude saves to resist being fatigued as well, though that doesn't seem super common. And as well, whenever you roll a success on an athletics check to shove, you get a crit success instead, making you very good at pushing enemies around. With the various shove builds out there, bully builds that you can take into, Practice Brawn is actually really good in a number of builds. Now, this bonus to athletics to shove or force open is very solid, even if you're not intending on fully investing into your strength, because this can make you as good as a character who's fully invested in strength, or at least very, very close a lot of the time. So that being said, I say this one's really good. If you want to play a bully Centaur build, then Practice Brawn is probably a must take. Next up, we have Skilled Herbalist. Now, this is an interesting one, and it, like I said, kind of tied into the Centaur lore a little bit. You gain the alchemical crafting feat, except that the items that you have to select must include Lesser Antidote, Lesser Antiplague, and Minor Elixir of Life. The fourth first level common alchemical formula that you know can be of your choice, and you can use nature to craft an alchemical item that has a healing trait rather than crafting. So good if you're already going, like if you're going a druid centaur, which makes a lot of sense if you want to go like a green speaker, for instance. This will allow you to essentially be really good at crafting with using your nature for these kind of items. So honestly, a really good feat. Now, why the Centaur lore didn't make sense is because this one exists, because you can use nature rather than craft. You don't need crafting at all to really make good use of skilled herbalist, though technically the only items you will be able to craft are items with the healing trait. So that being said, if you are a character who wants to invest in a lot of nature but might have some crafting on the side, you can do some good alchemical crafting with this, and as well, you can have your better proficiency for the items you really want to make well. But otherwise, if you were going to go the full alchemical route, there's no reason why you just wouldn't use craft anyway. So I like skilled herbalist more as like an add-on for a character who is going to be like a druid, for instance, who is going to want to have their nature boosted as much as possible. So that being said, skilled herbalist is really, really good. Steel hoof. This ties in exactly what I was talking about with the iron hoof or heritage earlier, and as well, you actually need to be an iron hoof to take this particular heritage. This just increases your hoof attack damage from a d6 to a d8 instead. So extra damage, though it would have been better if it was agile, obviously, but instead it got made finesse. Regardless, having a d8 unarmed strike that you just have available at all times is really good in a lot of sense. It's a very solid attack, and honestly, if you're going a monk, for instance, now you can do huff attacks and do more damage than your powerful fist normally would. So honestly, not bad, especially if you're a monk who doesn't want to go with the stance route. So very good for some interesting options for sure. All right, moving up to level 5, we have accommodating mount. Again, very strange, and even still in here, they specify they don't want to be a mount. They only do this for their most trusted allies. But anyway, what this does is now, if you're unaware, mount rules for any kind of sentient creature like other player characters is both of you, even though you can move with the mount, which does save you on some movement, on your turn, you still are considered slowed on your allies. So both you and your ally are slowed as you're both maintaining balance typically. So both of you only get 2 actions rather than a full 3 actions. Well, with the Centaur's accommodating mount, the Centaur still needs to maintain the action cost to be a mount to their allies. So as the Centaur, you only get 2 actions on your turn, but your ally gets 3 actions. So really good in a lot of situations. I do feel like this particular one is very good for power combos. If you're playing one, I can see the sniping duo doing really, really well with accommodating mount for sure. But it's really good, not for the player themselves, but if you want to be a big supporter for your team, accommodating mount is an incredibly powerful feat. Also here at level 5, we have Distant Archer. Like I said, archery is a big part of being a Centaur, so Dex is not necessarily a bad thing. And this one is actually insanely good because what it does is you reduce the range penalty for any range weapon you're using by 1 for past the first range increment. So, here. You reduce the penalty for attacking beyond your first range increment by 1 to a minimum of 0 when using weapons in the bow weapon group. So, that being the case, they are really good at shooting enemies at long distance, making them really good snipers. And as well, I'm curious if this stacks with the Rangers version that allows them to do the same thing with their marked prey. So, that would be a really good combination. You can make the best sniper currently using a Centaur, which I think is very, very interesting. So, that being said, Distant Archer is insanely good if you want to go a sniping long distance bow kind of route. Also at level 5, we have Proud Mentor. This is a very interesting one, and this one increases the use of the aid action. So now whenever you aid, if you get a critical failure, you actually just get a normal failure instead, so you're not hindering your ally. And whenever an ally that you aided crit succeeds on whatever the check you were doing, you gain temp HP equal to your level, which lasts for a minute. That's insanely good. I can see a really good commander Centaur who's very focused on helping their allies as much as possible get really good use out of this. And because it's based on your level, that's also not a small amount of temp HP as well. 8 actions are incredibly powerful in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, so if you're a player who enjoys aiding their allies, then Proud Mentor is Mentor. That's really good. Proud Mentor is a really, really good feat. The final level 5 feat we have here is Speaker in Training. Now, you either need to be a budding Speaker Centaur heritage or have the ability to cast either Divine or Primal spells. Now, this one is going to say a lot of the same stuff. If you're selecting this as a Primal or Divine spellcaster, if it's Divine, you're a Faith Speaker. If it's Primal, you're a Green Speaker. This makes you that for all intents and purposes for later feats. And of course, you would have made this choice when you selected the Budding Speaker Heritage. But what this gives you is access to a good first level spell. If you're a Faith Speaker specifically, you gain access to the Bless spell. And if you're a Green Speaker, you gain access to Fleet Step. Both of these are really good, and you get access to casting each of these once per day. So overall, really, really good. Bless is one of my favorite spells that you can get early in the game. So very much not a bad choice, and everyone knows the power of Fleet Step, especially when it's on a wand. This would just remove the necessity for getting it on a wand, more or less. So overall, Speaker in Training is a very solid feat. All right, at level 9, we have a Herbal Forager. Now, this requires the Skilled Herbalist feat that we saw earlier, which allows you to essentially make alchemical items using your nature instead. And this one's actually really, really cool because each day during your daily preparations, you can make a temporary version of a healing alchemical item that, you know, only lasts for a day. It will go away on your next daily preparations if you don't use it. Honestly, when I kind of looked at this one, I thought this is okay overall. Now, it's very nice because in Pathfinder, alchemical items are genuinely really good, especially things like Elixir of Life. And of course, anti-plague or anti-poison are very solid. So it's good to have any of these on hand per day. Though, honestly, it's just one. So I don't know if it's worth a level 9 feat. It can be good. I'm not saying it's a bad feat by any means. This can very much be good to have. I mean, because if you're in a survival situation where you don't have the ability to go back to town, having just healing every day that you can use is very solid. And if you know you're going into a particular place that's known for being disease-ridden or full of poisons, then having either of those would be handy as well. So it's kind of like being an alchemist. You can have an extra prepared item every day that has the healing trait anyway. But, you know, you have to judge for yourself whether this is necessary. Honestly, in my games, my players often have a store of healing items anyway. And if you have a good healer on your team, this makes this even less necessary. But, you know, I do think this is really good, and I do love anything that lets you just get free items every day as well. So overall, I'm going to say Herbal Forager is a really good feat. Also at level 9, we have Fierce Competitor. This is a very interesting one. So Centaur are very well known for being highly competitive, even to the point of appearing somewhat boorish for it. And once per day, you can challenge a single ally to some kind of physical competition that requires either acrobatics or athletics. And it's funny, the example they give here, it says, such as climbing to the top of a wall. The idea of a centaur climbing is kind of goofy, not gonna lie, especially if it's like a wall of a building. Regardless, it's really funny. Now, you challenge your ally, and you and your ally both gain a +2 circumstance bonus to the associated check for the next minute. And if you win, you also get a +2 circumstance bonus to intimidation checks for an hour as you're overly hyped. If your ally wins, nothing really much, but other than the bonus to the initial check. So overall, this can be really good. There's so many different exploration activities that happen where just like, oh, the group needs to climb this wall. And once per day, your centaur can be like, hey, mate, I know you suck at climbing, but hey, wanna race up the mountain with me? And this can give them a pretty good bonus to their like climb check, for instance. So overall, I think this is really good. I think there's a lot of situations where this one comes in handy. I really wish it wasn't once per day, even though obviously having a +2 status bonus to intimidation checks for an hour is really, really good. So yeah, the once per day part is the only part that sticks with me, but getting the intimidation, it makes sense for sure. And it's only a singular action. So this can easily be done in combat as well. And this is essentially a better aid check to that ally that you don't even have to spend a reaction to give them. So there's a lot of ways Fierce Competitor can be used very, very well inside and outside of combat, making it a great feat. Next up, we have a Mentor of Legends. This is actually a really good one. So once per day, you gain access to cast Heroism as an innate divine spell. In addition to its normal effects, it also grants a number of temp HP equal to half your level. The only stipulation is you can't cast a spell on yourself. Heroism is an insanely good spell. Now, obviously, it's only the base version of Heroism, so it's only that +1 status bonus, but it does last for a good amount of time, is an area based like Bless, and it gives temp HP, making it a very good spell to have in your back pocket. Honestly, Mentor of Legends is an insanely good feat as it gives you access to one of the best buffing spells in the game. Even though it can be heightened, it's still really good, and that temp HP does kind of help bridge the gap of the heightened versions of Heroism, at least a little bit. So that being the case, I think Mentor of Legends is a really, really good feat. Also at level 9 here, which there's a lot of level 9 feats here. Oh my gosh, Centaur. So many classes don't have a lot of good ancestry feats and definitely don't have a ton to pick through. Centaur has a lot of good feats. So if you're playing a Centaur, you're eating good. This one is right on. It's a reaction you can use once per hour, and the trigger is anytime you would gain the fatigue condition. So you can delay the effects of having fatigue for 3 rounds. Now, if the fatigue condition does have a duration, that duration begins to elapse after the delay. So you can't use it to eat up some of the fatigue duration, but that's typically not a big deal. And 3 rounds is massive. If you're not using this in the first or even second round of combat, this is likely to last for the remainder of the combat. And you can't further delay or prevent the fatigue condition after this ability ends. So this can't be stacked with other fatigue removing feats, which is understandable. Overall, Right On is really good, though it has to be used for a class in particular that is prone to making itself fatigued. One such good example is the Barbarian, for instance. So if you're playing a Barbarian Centaur, I definitely would recommend taking a look at Right On if you're making yourself fatigued in combat for whatever reason. Also at level 9, we have Speaker's Defense. Another really good one. Now, this one does require either you have the Budding Speaker Centaur heritage or the Speaker in Training one, which obviously makes a lot of sense. And I do like the fact that not all of these are necessarily a linked tree. For instance, if you took the Budding Speaker Centaur heritage, you don't need to have Speaker in Training to select this one, which I think is a really, really good option. Simultaneously, you don't need to have the heritage to get to this point either. So there's a lot of good design when it comes to the Centaur. Now, this one gives you access to yet another spell. Actually, yet another 2 spells. As if you're a Faith Keeper, or Faith Speaker, sorry, you can call on the gods to cast either Share Life or Status, each once per day. And if you're a green speaker, you can get Entangling Flora and Environmental Endurance. Now, obviously, these are... Entangling Flora, I think, is a particularly good one. So if you're a green speaker, I think you're solid. Environmental Endurance is okay, but kind of niche. Share Life is really good for support builds. And Status, I think, because of its long duration, really can be used in a lot of situations. So overall, I'll say Speaker's Defense is pretty good. Not crazy good. They're okay spells generally, and if you're not a major spellcaster, things like Entangling Flora might not be the best, but because most of these are at least buffs, your spellcasting modifier isn't going to be much of a factor, so I do like that aspect of it. So overall, a pretty good feat. The final level 9 feat we have here today is Stubborn Defiance. This one is good, and you'll notice a trend here. This one gives bonuses against mental effects. You get a +1 status bonus to saves against any kind of mental effect, and additionally, you gain the I Defy You reaction, where you can use this reaction once per hour, and the reaction can be used when you fail a saving throw. You get to reroll the triggering save, but you must take the new results. So this, you might be wondering, like, man, there's so many ancestries that have resistance to mental effects. That's because Paizo knows some of the most anti-fun effects in Pathfinder are the ones that take control of your player PC actions. So that being the case, it makes a lot of sense to sprinkle these throughout the various ancestries to avoid having your characters being taken over, as those can be some of the most unfun moments in the game. Though good DMs obviously wouldn't use these kind of actions that often, so Stubborn Defiance really depends on the kind of DM you have. If you have a DM who doesn't like taking control of the players or doesn't like using any kind of mental effects on them, it probably won't come up. I mean, there's still a lot of good spells that have the mental trait that aren't inherently taking control of player actions for sure. So this does have a lot of uses outside of that. But, you know, something to keep in mind. Some GMs just don't like doing these kind of actions. So it might be more or less relevant for your game. Regardless, Stubborn Defiance is really, really good, though, for somewhat niche situations. Granted, the bonus against any kind of mental effect is solid. So yeah, it's a good feat. All right, we're up here to level 13, and man, I blasted through everything in the beginning, and I thought we were gonna get done with this video any sooner than the others, but that's not gonna be the case. The Centaur just has so many feats. Regardless, let's talk about Camouflage Coat. Camouflage Coat is very good because it works with the Model Coat Centaur heritage. So if you want to be the stealthy Centaur, well, now you have a better chance of doing it, because in your selected environment from being a Model Coat, you can now hide or sneak without cover or being concealed. So where'd the Centaur go? I don't know. I'm being stabbed. It's very good. It's very fun. I really like this one. It works really well, especially if you're actually going a gunslinger and going the sniper route. So that's something that should definitely be taken into consideration as well. I think Camouflage Coat is really, really good. Also here at level 13, we have Incredible Sprint. This is 2 actions, and it lets you stride 3 times for 2 actions. I don't know. This is an okay feat. The point of this feat in particular is just to show that your character is faster than other characters, more or less, because essentially you can stride 4 times in a round rather than 3. So for chases, this is good. For everything else, I don't know many situations where striding twice is not going to be just enough to get you where you need to go, especially because you're a Centaur and you're already fast. I mean, heck, striding once is probably good enough. So taking a feat that might not give you like any more movement than really necessary for the 2 action expenditure, I don't think is worth it most of the time. But like I said, if you're in any kind of chase or any kind of story moment where your character's speed really is relevant, then yeah, Incredible Sprint is really good. So I'll say this one is okay. In combat, it's probably not overly practical, but there are a good number of roleplay scenes that can happen where this one would come in a lot in handy. So yeah, it's generally okay. Another level 13 feat, we have Miraculous Medic. This is really, really good because once per day you get to cast Breath of Life as an innate primal spell. So yeah, not much to say. Once per day, if someone would die, you can prevent that, which is very solid. So I think Miraculous Medic is an insanely good feat, and it works so well. There's no prerequisite. So you don't need to even go down a lot of the like herbal medicine stuff. So any Centaur that picks this up just ensures that your team is less likely to die. Even a barbarian one, though they would need to be not raging, could still make use of this one. So I do think Miraculous Medic is a very solid choice for a lot of characters. If nothing else at level 13 here suits your fancy. Our final level 13 feat, 4 level 13 feats, holy moly, we have Trample. Now, this is a 3 action one. It does allow you to stride double your speed, which is different than 2 strides. So you're not striding twice, you're striding at double your speed. That is relevant for a variety of actions in the game, just so you know. And you can move through the spaces of creatures that are at least one size smaller than you. So more often than not, medium or smaller. If you're a pony gate, then small or smaller. And for each creature whose space you pass through, you deal bludgeoning damage equal to your hoof attack. So if you're an iron hoof, all the better. Though the damage is based on a basic reflex saving throw against your class DC. So with the highest speed of the Centaur, I would say this one's actually not that bad. For 3 actions, you can cover a lot of ground going at twice your speed, and you get to essentially attack every enemy you move through. Granted, they have a just as good a chance of succeeding as failing typically, so it is likely to at least always do some damage, at least half to most of the enemies you run through, and fall to some of the ones that fail. If they crit fail, all the better. If they crit succeed, kind of sucks, but is very unlikely to happen. So I do like Trample. I think it's pretty good as a full round action to attack a bunch of mook enemies, though against, encounters that don't have any more than oh goodness, I would say for 3 actions, you would need to attack 3 enemies minimum, I feel like, to make this worth, and even then 3 might not be good enough. Now, granted, if you have Hand Wraps of Mighty Blows, your hoof attack damage might be really, really good. And it does say, or an unarmed strike if you lack a hoof attack for whatever reason. And that being the case, I can see this being good. I can see this being good in a lot of situations. It's not my favorite feat for sure, but I do see the potential in it, and I think it can be really, really fun. So yeah, Trample, very, very solid. So we're about to hit the level 17 feats, but before we get to that, if you would be so kind, please leave a like on this video. It helps other people see the content on the channel. Pathfinder channels are notoriously not represented well in the algorithm, and there's a lot of channels out there who've never even heard of my channel, despite all the work I've done for Pathfinder content over the years. So, it helps out a lot. And hey, if you like my content, subscribe. You get to see more, especially because next month we're going to be talking about Player Core 2, and I'm going to be doing the same thing I did with the first Player Core, where I go over all the changes from Legacy to Remasters. So if you want to see that content, subscribing is going to be your best chance to do so. But let's go ahead and talk about the level 17 feats. Finally, we're at to the last couple of feats here. First, we have Merge with the Source. A very interesting one, and this one also goes down the speaker line. Now, you just need to be either a budding speaker Centaur or a speaker in training. So again, what I really like about this is it's not a feat tree. If you didn't like the other feats for whatever other reasons, you don't have to take them to select this one, which is really good. So even again, if you're a martial Centaur for whatever reason, but you have the budding speaker Centaur heritage, you can take a look at these and see if any of them apply to your character. So if you're a faith speaker, you get to select from either angel form, demon form, or devil form. And if you're a green speaker, you get either elemental form or plant form. You can cast these spells once per day as 7th rank innate versions of the spell. So overall, pretty good. Each of these do come with some temp HP that they give you and some good abilities in tandem with that. I really like this one. I think this applies to a lot of different characters. I feel like many of these forms can be helpful in a lot of situations. So, overall, pretty good. If you are either a budding speaker or a speaker in training, definitely an Ancestry feat I'd consider taking. And the final feat we have here is a very rare attack feat. Yeah, we get a unique attack at level 17 being a Centaur. Now, the specifications are you draw an arrow or other ammunition, whisper a short incantation or evocation over it, and you strike with it. Now, it does specify that you do have to make a strike with a ranged weapon. So, if you're using a ranged weapon, typically a bow, but it can be any ranged weapon, you shoot an arrow that takes the form of a shooting star, essentially, and you can wrap an enemy up in a constellation. So you shoot this arrow gains... or the arrow's damage changes to either force or spirit damage and gains the effect of the Ghost Touch rune, which is incredibly handy. And if the arrow strikes its target, it unravels and wraps around the target's limbs, imposing a -10 status or circumstance penalty to their speeds for 2d4 rounds, which is at minimum 2 rounds, which is massive in combat, or at most 8 rounds, which is guaranteed longer than most combats. Now, if it's a crit strike, they're immobilized for this amount of time. This would be insanely good if the target couldn't just untangle itself by spending an interact action to remove the bonds. Now, the actual insane part of this particular feat, there's no restriction to the number of times you can use this one. Every shot you take can potentially be a star shot arrow, which is insane. So this is really good. Just hitting an enemy in general is going to force their speed to go down and maybe even force them to spend an action to free themselves in a lot of situations. And if you crit, it's guaranteed going to expend one of their actions if they want to move. So I think Starshot Arrow is an insanely powerful feat. I'm surprised this one didn't get changed in the errata. Nothing mentioned on it. It's just every time you shoot an arrow, you can shoot a Starshot Arrow instead. Granted, this is a unique attack, so obviously this doesn't apply to other attacks that are strikes. But if you're not using any specific strikes, which honestly a lot of characters don't have specific strikes, then Starshot Arrow is really not a bad choice. An insanely powerful feat that constantly will make your enemies have a hard time. But not only that, does either force or spirit damage. Some of the least resisted / immune types of damage in the game. And ghost touch. So even creatures that are incorporeal are not safe from your arrows. So Starshot Arrow is insanely good if you're using range weapons of any kind. So I think this one's really good, and especially with that gunslinger sniper that I was talking about earlier, yeah, really, really good. So I think this is an absolutely amazing feat and rounds out the Centaur very well. Centaurs, who knew? They were honestly probably the most well-written and not best ancestry, but they're a very powerful ancestry. They have everything from offensive capabilities, some defensive capabilities, very heavy in the support action category. They have a very well written out cultures. They're much more written out than many of the ancestries, honestly, written in this book. And yeah, a lot of love and attention was put into the Centaurs for this book. So definitely, if you're going to play a Centaur, you are in good hands when it comes to Paizo's works. But that's going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching this long video. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me. And shoot for the stars, my fellow Centaurs. Bye.